Hey, welcome back to OnlineGunSafetyClass.com's YouTube channel. A good friend of mine, Ryan, sent me a video about Jon Stewart was interviewing Oklahoma State Senator Nathan Dahm, or Dahm, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, about gun control. So he sent it to me to kind of get my opinion on it, and I wanted to take a moment to go through this video with you and kind of give some responses to it as we go. At the end, I'm going to give an overall review response, my final response on this video. So I hope you'll stick around to the end and see what the conclusion is. I'm going to give it a fair look from both sides. Obviously, being OnlineGunSafetyClass.com, my goal is to teach people, law-abiding citizens, to be more confident and competent with their guns. So I am pro-gun, but I'm also able to look at this from both sides. So let's take a look at this together, and I'll pause it throughout the way and give some responses.
Strong proponent of the Second Amendment. I believe the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the one right that's listed in the Constitution that uses that very specific affirmative language, shall not be infringed.
Well, it's also the one right that uses the phrase well-regulated.
Correct, when it's talking about the...
Let me stop that right there for a moment. And when Jon Stewart says it's the only one that also uses well-regulated, I think that's something that people get caught up on, that word well-regulated. So the text of the Second Amendment is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But when people look at that, they think of the word regulated as meaning rules and regulations, and they think of militia as being a unit or group that's brought together as kind of like an army. And that's not the way words were used at the time that this was written. So well-regulated meant at the time, and can still be used this way, meant at the time, well-regulated means it's something that functions properly. So if you're talking about your gas engine in your motor vehicle, you have a fuel pressure regulator. That fuel pressure regulator makes sure that the pressure of the fuel getting to your engine is standard and it's consistent so that your engine runs properly. So if you took out the fuel pressure regulator, the engine wouldn't run properly. It would misfire. It would probably choke out. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when you have that regulation, that it's not being regulated. So the well-regulated means that a well-regulated militia, so a functioning militia, and militia at that time didn't mean a group of people necessarily that were all part of the government or part of a group or part of the state. A militia was simply any able-bodied adult who is able to fight for the country. So that was everybody. So really what it was saying is, in a well-regulated militia is a group of able-bodied adults who function properly is necessary to the free state. So in order for us to be able to defend against foreign threat, we have to have people who know how to use the guns, have guns. So that's where that comes from. So it's a misnomer when they say well-regulated, because it doesn't mean rules and regulations. You could simply say today, a well-regulated engine being necessary for a car to operate properly, the right of the people to keep a fuel pressure regulator shall not be infringed. It's kind of the same thing, and it seems silly, but let's continue with the video.
Militia and the state.
By the way, just for clarity's sake, I'm not against the Second Amendment. I don't want to ban guns. But you're saying more guns makes us more safe.
Yes.
So when we got 400 million guns in the country, we had an increase and gun deaths went up. So when exactly does this curve hit that takes it down? Would 1 billion guns do it?
Let's just run those.
Okay. Before we even let Senator Dahm reply, I want to point out, so he talks about we have guns and guns make you more safe. And I think, yes, overall, guns make people more safe in an overall function. Does it mean that guns make you more safe from gun crime? Not necessarily, because there are other situations where a gun has prevented crime. Think of home invasions where someone comes in and they're going to kill or attack, and a gun isn't used by the perpetrator, but the person defending themselves in the home. So I think the guns can make you more safe. But when Jon Stewart talks about we have this many guns and gun crime went up, but we don't have a crystal ball. And there's two things that we can't compare here. One, we don't know. Let's look at gun crime for a second. But we don't know if more guns or less guns would have made gun crime go up or down, because we don't know. We can't predict. We don't have a crystal ball of what the other side of that coin is. We can't say, well, you know what, in this alternate universe where there were no guns, crime was down. Because we could look at it and go, hey, you know what, in this alternate universe where there were no guns, crime went up because people weren't afraid of breaking into homes or breaking into cars or robbing stores because they knew that there were no guns to stop them. So we don't have that crystal ball to look at that. But also, let's look at all crime, not just gun crime. Because guns can stop all crimes. Remember, robberies. If somebody's going to rob you, there are times that a gun has stopped other crimes. So we have to look at not just gun crime, but all crimes that could have been affected by gun ownership, or in the perpetrator's mind, the fear of gun ownership. So those are things that we can't really confuse, and Jon Stewart, I think, kind of confuses that a little bit, because we can't predict that that crime would go up or down if guns aren't there. It's not predictable.
Numbers, 400 million, 50,000. You're talking about less than a fraction of, not even a percent, of 1/100%.
But it goes up, not down. So your argument is backwards.
But if you want, okay, so let's come up with a solution. Okay, so one of the issues, a contributing factor, again, I believe it's the individual that is the problem.
So your solution to that is give them more guns.
So I'm saying that because people are the problem, we need to look at the problems that those people are facing and how do we address it.
But you've removed the ability for the state to do that.
No, because you're...
If you don't have background checks and you don't have registration and permitting, how do you know who has a problem in terms of the people who you're giving a gun to?
You want to...
Okay, so I'll stop right there for a second. So Jon Stewart does have a little bit of a point there. If he's saying that, we should just give guns to everybody, that could be problematic. If you're saying that people are the problem, and I think that there are some issues where people are the problem, again, with those suicides, clearly there's a problem that needs to be addressed. It's not the gun's fault. We need to address the problem with the people. So, but when Jon Stewart, I'm going to half agree with him, and I know I'm going to catch some flack for this, but when Jon Stewart says background checks and registration of firearms will help us determine who should have these guns, well, I think background checks, when properly used, are an okay tool. But remember, there is a possibility of abuse on a background check. And I'm going to talk about that in my overall review, because there is a mistrust on both sides, left and right. So I think that there is definitely a way to properly use background checks. However, registration, I don't think addresses who should and shouldn't have a gun. So registration, historically speaking, has only led to confiscation. So that's one that I'm firmly against, a registration of firearms, because that opens the can of worms. Once you register, you can't take that back. So let's continue.
Talk about the background checks first, or do you want to talk about solutions first?
I want to talk about what you're doing is you're bringing chaos to order.
That's your subjective opinion, that it's bringing chaos to order.
It's not my subjective opinion. We have 50,000 gun-related deaths. That's not a subjective opinion.
Okay, so
that's dead people.
Let me pause right there. So when he talks about 50,000 people, that is, again, 48,830 gun deaths, 26,328 were suicide by gun. So 50,000 is a little bit of a skew there. But it's also important to look at the rest of this.
Let me back up for a second. In every other place in your life, you want to bring order, but guns are the outlier for you. So let's start with immigration. You want registration, maybe a wall, maybe not a wall. Why do you want that?
Well, one of the reasons is because of the fentanyl crisis.
Right.
Okay, here's where we're going to go kind of sideways. The State Senator Dahm is going to bring up the fentanyl crisis. And I will say this. You can never have a debate or discussion about guns by saying, oh, but this is way worse. Over here, don't look over here. Don't look at the guns because this is worse. We need to focus on the guns to start going into, and Jon Stewart does a good job of kind of directing it there. But the state senator should have avoided this, because when we talk about immigration and Jon Stewart talks about bringing order to chaos, that's suggesting that, again, the United States is an orderly place without the guns. And somehow by him pushing forward this legislation, that there's going to be chaos now. And I think we can already see that the border is chaotic. So he's trying to bring order to chaos. So we can say that the border is chaotic. There's nobody who can look me in the eyes and say everything's fine at the border and we don't need to do something about the border, because it is a problem. And as far as registering people as they come across, I don't think registering is the fair word, but we do need to have, as a government, we do need to have a control of who's in our country, who's let in our country, because there's no guarantee of anyone coming into the United States. We have laws that allow for immigration, that allow for asylum, but you're not guaranteed that you can just come into the United States. So we have to have a system of doing that. So let's continue.
Okay,
and you don't know when it's coming across. So what do you do?
The fentanyl crisis is twice what the gun death crisis is.
Okay, so until the gun crisis gets to the fentanyl level,
not until it.
You don't want to bring order.
No, not until it. But
do you see my point?
If we're going to talk about protecting lives, that's a larger issue in America than guns is. If we're talking about individual lives of ways that they can be protected, loss of life in America.
I just got to say for a second, I love how Jon Stewart kind of knows he's got him in the trap, and he's got that smirk on his face, because the senator is kind of saying the things that are wrong, and I feel like the senator kind of knows talking points more than a depth of knowledge on the subject, and that's where he's getting caught in these traps. So I kind of like the smirk on Jon Stewart's face.
There's loss of life through fentanyl. There's loss of life through obesity. The obesity crisis in America costs 6 times the number of lives as...
Hey, leave obesity out of it.
Guns.
Right, and so, you're the guy saying, you know what would help this? Ice cream.
No. So, you know what would help the problem that we're facing with firearms?
What?
The fatherlessness crisis that we have in America. If you look at the statistics...
Right. Yeah, they're dying from gun deaths.
Okay, they're not dying from gun deaths. There is a crisis of fatherless children in America. And that's one of the things I'll talk about in the wrap-up. But that's something that needs to be addressed. When we have kids that have no guidance, and maybe the only guidance they're getting is from the streets, and I've dealt with this in my 2 decades of law enforcement, there are some kids that they have no fathers or mothers really for guidance. And so they get their ideas from the streets, and they don't have food, and they don't have shelter, and they're looking for a way to secure those things, then they're going to turn to crime. And so these are things that we do need to address, and I'll talk about that in the wrap-up. But to suggest that we have fatherless crisis in America because the fathers were killed by gunfire, again, 22,502 homicides by guns. I think there were more fathers that year. So let's continue.
80% of school shooters either came from a broken or fatherless home.
So you would say no guns for fatherless homes?
No, that's not what I would say. I would say that fathers need to be more engaged.
Great. So let's
crime with a firearm if they don't have a father in the home.
Let's put more resources into areas that are poverty-stricken. All for it.
And into fatherlessness, and that's something that we're doing.
But why, with guns, are you against bringing order?
I'm not against bringing.
So again, I like what Jon Stewart said there, is that yes, these are things, and the senator said it as well. These are things we need to address. But I don't like where it goes to then that somehow the guns are bringing disorder. But let's continue.
In order.
You are. You're also making it less safe for cops and for people. When the police go to a domestic call, it's the most dangerous call they can go on. In your world, if they knew that there were firearms in the house, that's a safer call. Is that what you're saying?
No, because police...
Because why?
Because police treat every situation as a potential...
But more guns makes us safer.
So again, Jon Stewart's going to the more guns make us safer. But that doesn't mean that more guns make us safer in every situation. So again, 2 decades in law enforcement, yes, going to a domestic violence situation is statistically the most dangerous call you can go on. And it's foolish to say, well, if the cops know that there's a gun there, that they'll be more safe, because it's two different situations. We're talking about safety in situations. Not everybody who owns a gun is going to be a domestic abuser. So when we're talking about taking the rights away from people who have never committed a crime who have guns, because there are some people that do, and conflating it with how dangerous police officers' jobs is, it's a little wishy-washy on that. No cop is going there thinking, oh, if there's guns, it's more safe. And I don't think anyone would suggest that more guns. That house may be more safe from burglars, from something that happens to the house or to the people in the house, but not from the cops. That's a different argument, and Jon Stewart going down there, I think, is a little bit wishy-washy.
So why don't, when the police go to a house filled with guns, why don't they breathe a sigh of relief, knowing
Again.
that this Second Amendment that shall not be infringed is being exercised so fruitfully in this home?
Are you familiar with the 39-year-old woman in New Jersey?
I'm familiar with a ton of anecdotes.
Yeah.
I'm asking you a simple question.
This is not an anecdote,
When
John.
the police
this actually happened.
go to a house...
She had a restraining order on her ex-boyfriend.
I
of
can
an
run
individual.
through
I know, we can both run
hundreds
through
and
that.
hundreds of examples of women killed by their domestic partners by guns that were not taken away through the lessening of red flag laws. You're pivoting to anecdotes.
No, this is not anecdotes.
What the police say, if we had gun registration, if we were able to track purchases, they have a technology that every bullet would be stamped with an individual like a fingerprint. If we had an ATF that wasn't defunded, we would be able to enforce gun laws more effectively, and we would be able to solve gun crimes more.
Okay, let me stop right there for a minute, because he talks about, when law enforcement says these things. But what he's really saying is when law enforcement from traditionally democratically controlled cities say these three things. Because if you look at, I'm in Florida, if you look at Florida and you look at Grady Judd, the sheriff of Polk County, he would disagree with all three of those things. In fact, he said numerous times, if you break into a house in Polk County, be prepared to be shot. Our homeowners are armed and they will shoot you. So to say that the police want this, again, we're falling on those lines of Democratic cities and Republican cities, or Republican areas and Democratic areas. So not all police believe that way. And again, 2 decades of law enforcement, I didn't believe that all of the guns should be tracked. And when we talk about micro stamping of ammunition, that is at a rate right now where tracking that is not, he says it's doable, and it's doable, but not to an extent where it's doable without affecting and without applying to the Second Amendment, where that you can do it and there's no cost and increase in cost. There's no other problems with it. It's not to that level right now. That is a fallacy. So we can't even talk about that.
Effectively. You're against all of that.
Because the person is the threat, not the firearm, not the knife.
I get it.
The person and the individual is the one that is the concern here.
But you don't want anything that could help law enforcement or society determine whether or not a person is a good guy with a gun or a bad guy with a gun.
Even
the registry would allow you to have much more effective background checks. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand why you won't just admit that...
Hold on, before he gets into this, I don't understand why we're conflating a registry with background checks, because those are two different things. A background check is, hey, you go to buy a gun and you go through a background check. And in Florida, that happens. Even though I'm a concealed weapons and firearm license holder, when I go and fill out the form, I have to wait for my background check to be done. Not all states are that way, I'll agree. And I don't think it's onerous. And so that's something I do agree with, that a background check, when done properly, can be effective. But it doesn't tie in with a registration at all. And a registration leads to confiscation. So there's too much at play with a registration of things going poorly.
You are making it harder for police to manage the streets by allowing all of these guns to go out without permits, without checks, and without background stuff? Why is that hard? Why can't you just stand by that?
Because that's not what I'm doing.
Also, another thing that I want to point out, which is kind of hypocritical of the left position on guns, is that we need more regulation. We need more background checks. We need a registration. We need to know who has the guns, and then we can enforce the laws. At the same time, they're letting criminals out of jail. And I'm not talking about for shoplifting. I'm not talking about for minor crimes. They are letting people who have used guns in crimes out of jail. Recently, there was a guy, I think it was in Oregon. Don't quote me on that. I'll try to fact check it and put it in the comments. But he was arrested because he shot and killed 2 people, and there were 5 others injured. He was arrested for that. Now, for some reason, it still has not gone to trial, and it's been a couple years. And the judge this past couple weeks released him on no bail to his grandmother, and he has an ankle monitor. So here we now are releasing mass shooters, but saying that if we had some sort of way of mechanism of knowing who had guns, then we could enforce the laws. And there's a problem with that. We're saying that we can enforce the laws, but we're not enforcing the laws we already have. And that's where some of that mistrust comes in that I'll talk about in my recap.
I'm defending the individual's right to keep and bear arms.
That's a different argument.
Okay, well,
you may do. Here's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. You want to say I'm a Second Amendment purist and I'm making it safer. You're not. You're making it more chaotic, and that's not a matter of opinion. That's the truth.
That is a matter.
I gotta agree with what the state senator was about to say. That is a matter of opinion. We don't know that these are making things less safe or more safe overall. You might look at gun crime, which again is a small number. When you look at it and you go, well, 22,000 homicides by guns, that's a lot. But when you look at a country with over 300 million people, it seems a lot smaller. And to suggest that whatever he's doing is automatically increasing gun crime, maybe gun crime goes up, but maybe overall crime goes down. So there's something we don't have that crystal ball.
Of opinion, John.
But why take away their tools?
Because certain of their tools that they're using would be infringements upon the people's right to keep and bear arms, upon their constitutional rights, upon due process, upon other things.
That registering is an infringement?
Yes.
Okay. Is voting a right?
It's a right for citizens, yes.
Do you have to do anything to do it?
Yes.
What do you have to do?
It depends on the state.
What do you have to do?
Sometimes you have to be at least 18 years old.
What do you have to do?
And in some places you have to have a government-issued ID.
What do you have to? You have to
be on the voter rolls.
Register.
Okay. John Smith did a really good job there of walking him down that path. And unfortunately, the state senator, you're going to end up getting to that word register. Trying to dance around it makes him look a little foolish. You have to register to vote. But these are 2 different things. With voting, if you register to vote, they can't take anything away from you. If you register your guns, they can come to you later and say, we're taking those from you. And it's been explained recently, or it's been on display recently with a couple years ago when they banned bump stocks. Bump stocks were banned and everyone had to voluntarily turn them in. Now, you and I both know that there's some people that didn't turn them in. Some did, some destroyed them. There was a company that had manufactured, prior to the ban, had manufactured 60,000 bump stocks. The ban went into place. They had to destroy them. That was, $1.2 million worth of revenue producing material that people probably lost their jobs at the factories for. And it's been now overruled, so they still have them. So people who kept them, it's now legal. Not suggesting that you do that. But that was a rule, not a law. And now the ATF has come out with another rule, and it's on the pistol brace. And that's way muddier than the bump stock ever was. And with the pistol brace rule, you're going to have to turn them in, or you're going to have to destroy them, or you're going to have to take them off. And they literally said on the phone call, put your gun in your sock drawer and put the brace in your underwear drawer, and you'll be fine. ATF lawyers, that were their words. And so it's not clear. But if you have a registration and they decide, hey, we're going to ban this specific type of gun, now they're going to come to your house. They're going to come to your house and say, we know you have one of these and we're taking it. And there's a mistrust on that. And it's not a misplaced mistrust. And we'll talk about that.
You have to register. So you have to register to a right. Is that an infringement?
Does the right to voting say shall not be infringed?
Oh, so this is just a semantic argument now.
No, it's not.
You believe voting rights can be infringed because it doesn't say specifically shall not be infringed.
Is it an infringement upon a 17-year-old's right to vote, since they don't have that right to vote?
No.
Oh, it's not an infringement on them?
No,
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because you're the one making the argument, not me. I'm saying...
Wait a minute, that's a good point. So Jon Stewart is saying, well, you have to register, but we don't register 17-year-olds. We register 18 and up. So it's still, it's an argument that I'm going to agree with the state senator kind of on that, in that, there are rules and gun rules are different than voting rules. And
even rights have responsibilities, and that within those responsibilities are responsibilities and order. Otherwise, it's chaotic. I'll
100% agree with him. Rights have responsibilities. If you're a gun owner, you have a responsibility to become a confident and competent gun owner, to train with your weapons and to use them for hunting or shooting practice, target practice, whatever you do with them, and self-defense. The minute you go offensive with the weapons, I agree that you should lose your right to have those guns. If you are a convicted felon, you should lose those rights. So it's not like there's absolutely no rights. But let's carry on.
go you one further. You want to ban drag show readings to children.
To minors, yes.
Why?
Why?
What are you protecting?
Why can we prohibit children from voting, those under 18 from voting?
Why are you banning?
But also that.
Is that free speech? Are you infringing on that performer's free speech?
They can continue to exercise their free speech, just not in front of a child.
Okay, Jon Stewart bringing this up kind of hurts a little because when he talks about infringing on free speech, there are some things you can't. There are things that aren't free speech. You don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. You don't have the right to say threats, and there's libel and slander. So there are limitations on that. And I think if you look at the majority of Americans, they would agree with that. And I find it weird that we're in a time where we have to specifically say, hey, you know what? We shouldn't have drag shows in front of kids. And I'm not talking about just drag shows in front of kids, because it's one thing if you're with your family and you go somewhere and you find out there's a drag event going on and you're there. But when they're specifically now taking those drag events to bring them to kids, and I'm talking about they're going to libraries at, in 5 years old, 6 years old, I don't understand why they want to do that. What is the purpose of exposing kids to that at a young age? Some of the books that have been in libraries that have been taken off the shelves, you've seen the parents try to read them at the school board meetings, and the school board shuts them down because they don't want to hear obscenity, but they're letting the kids have it. Or recently there was an event where a child, I believe it was a child, was reading from a book, and it was being broadcast on the news. It was live broadcast by some of the news channels, and the news channels cut the feed because they weren't sure if they would be fined by the FCC for what this child was saying during daytime hours. So there has been limitations on that. And Jon Stewart in the media is well aware of that. The stuff he was able to say on his HBO show and on Apple TV is much different than what he could say on Comedy Central, and much different than what he could say when he would go on to the late night shows on NBC or ABC or CBS. So there have always been restrictions on that. So to bring that in to try to muddy this is a little weird to me.
Why?
Because the government does have a responsibility to protect.
I'm sorry?
The government does have a responsibility in certain instances to
What's
protect
the
children.
leading cause of death amongst children in this country? And I'm going to give you a hint. It's not drag show readings to children.
Correct, yes.
So what is?
Okay, so now we're having the argument that the only thing we can focus on is guns. That's the only thing that hurts kids. Kids are hurt by guns. It's the only thing we can protect them from. We shouldn't worry about anything else. And that's kind of a weak case.
I'm presuming you're going to say it's firearms.
No, I'm not going to say it like it's an opinion. That's what it is. It's firearms. More than cancer, more than car accidents. And what you're telling me is you don't mind infringing free speech to protect children from this amorphous thing that you think of. But when it comes to children that have died, you don't give a flying fuck to stop that, because that shall not be in.
Ironically, he couldn't say that on ABC during the daytime without an FCC fine. Ask Howard Stern even about the radio waves. So he knows that there is a difference between the freedom of speech and the Second Amendment.
Infringed. That is hypocrisy at its highest order.
Hey, so here's my final wrap-up of this video. I think it was a good video. I think Jon Stewart did a really good job of doing what he tried to do, and that was make the state senator look kind of foolish in his positions. And you got to give it up to Jon Stewart in this. He was way more prepared for this interview than the Oklahoma State Senator. And I think the Oklahoma State Senator, I mentioned it during the video, I think he was more of a bullet points kind of guy. He knew the talking points. He knew the things that would excite his base. But he didn't have the knowledge, the depth of knowledge to come back when it was reframed against him, to be able to come back and look at that. So there's this mistrust. And again, it stems from historical speaking. When we talk about registry, there's this mistrust that if you register the guns, then you're going to end up with a situation where registration leads to confiscation. And it's widely held on the right. So there's that mistrust. And anytime there's any type of regulation, I think the right feels like it's a slippery slope towards something else. If you know, and it seems like we've had that going on in the last 10 years, where things are progressively getting more and more to the left. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing necessarily. There are some goods and some bads. But let's look at it from a solve this problem standpoint. And if we look at it from a solve this problem standpoint, then I think what needs to happen, and this will never happen, but I think both sides need to say, hey, you know what? Time out. Let's put a moratorium on everything for 5 years. So for 5 years, the left isn't going to try to increase any type of gun rights or gun control. There's going to be no change. And the right isn't going to try to relax any control or make anything more open. It's going to stay right where it is for 5 years. And then both sides are going to take all of the money that they're putting into lobbyists and going after politicians and giving them on their side. They're going to take all that money, and we're going to address the problems we have in America, which the mental health is a huge problem. When I was looking it up, 14.5 out of 100,000 commit suicide. Why are so many people in the United States, the greatest nation in the world, why are so many of them taking a permanent end to a temporary solution? We need to get to the root of that. Mental health is a real problem. We need to address it. We need to get there. And we're only going to get there by putting money towards it. And I think we need to do that. And if we get both sides, and again, I don't think this will ever happen, but if both sides will say, hey, let's try to solve mental illness, we might be able to get there. Let's solve the problem where we have children that don't see any way out of their situation other than resorting to violence, or not even just violence in general, but sometimes violence as a method of survival, as a means of survival, and finding out why communities can't help each other build up and get better. Because right now I see a lot of hurting people in this country, and there's a lot of people that are hurt by their families, they're hurt by their communities, and they're hurt by their government. And we need to find a way to make sure that the families, the community, and the government can help instead of hurt. And we need to find that, and we can find it. It's going to take time, it's going to take money. But we also need to have people that take responsibility for their actions. And we've kind of swung the pendulum the other way, where we're having a lot of these situations where people get arrested and it was a joke when I started 2 decades ago. One of the first arrests I made, someone told me, "Oh, I'll be out before you finish your paperwork." And he was probably right. Back then everything was handwritten. It took a while. But now you're looking at crimes where people are being arrested for serious crimes and then they're being released hours later. And we've gone to this side, and then we wonder why crime is up. So crime is up because we're letting criminals out. It's not necessarily that there's more guns. Crime is up because the criminals who use guns, we're not punishing. Let's punish them. And that will help bridge that distrust also. Because again, remember, the argument used to be, why do you need guns? All you have to do is call the cops and the cops will fix everything. And then a few years later, it became, all cops are bad, defund the police, you're not getting police anymore. Well, you tell us all we need are cops, and then you take the cops away. Or try to. And in some areas effectively do so. So we need to meet in the middle, and we need to find this. And as far as background checks, I'm okay with that as long as it's done responsibly. And you look at it, you can't have a background check system where it unnecessarily can be used to favor one side or another. And I'll give an example. The media likes to portray this as a loophole. When you talk about, there's 3 ways when you're doing a background check. There's a release, there's an approval, a denial, and a conditional approval. And the conditional approval means we haven't figured out if it's denied or approved yet, but you get to take the gun home, but you can't transfer ownership of that gun. And people call that a loophole, but it's not a loophole. It was put there on purpose because otherwise all the government would have to say in certain areas of the country that have this, all they would have to say is, hey, you know what? We've been backlogged. We haven't gotten to it. We just don't know. And it could be 6 months, a year, 2 years later before you can take possession of a gun that you purchased. So they could use that in a negative way. So there's that distrust. I think we can get there if we throw down all of the rhetoric and try to compare. I think one of the worst things in here was once they strayed away from guns and they started looking at fentanyl and they started looking at immigration and they started looking at voting, you're missing the point. Let's focus on, let's fix the culture that creates gun violence, because I've never committed gun violence. I have guns. I know plenty of people. I taught over 2,000 people gun safety. So they're safe, hopefully, with those guns. But I don't want them to lose their rights because the criminals. Let's have the criminals lose their rights. And we'll start there. I think if we can get to that point where we enforce the laws we already have, and then we'll come back and revisit maybe some new laws later. But let's get together, stop fighting about this, fix the mental health problem, fix the social structure and family structure problems, and get to the root of what causes people to want to commit crimes with guns. Because here's a tip, and I want you guys to all go look this up. But the largest school fatality in the United States was not committed with a gun. In the comments below, put what you found. I'm interested to see how many of you will look into this and put what the most deadly school fatality incident was and what weapon was used. Thanks again for joining me. I'll look forward to hearing your comments and replying to as many of them as I can. Have a great day.
If you